Hi, it's Ronald, the Rules Lawyer, and my coverage of Player Core 2 continues today with the next class in the alphabet, which is the Investigator. It's a class that poses challenges to players and to game masters to run, and I'm going to try to offer my legal interpretation skills to help both groups in today's video. First, to introduce myself, I am a lawyer who runs tabletop role-playing games. My preferred system is Pathfinder 2e. For several years, I ran an after-school, middle-school RPG class. Support my Patreon if you haven't already. I do not make money as a lawyer. For more info on that, look at this video. Supporting my Patreon gives you ad-free early access to most of my videos and exclusive content. The Investigator is our intelligence-based marshal who can devise a stratagem to pre-roll an attack roll against a foe. If they don't like the roll, they can attack something else. And if they go forward with the attack, they can use their intelligence for their accuracy and get precision damage added. Before, I would say it was a point of contention and there could be inconsistency between tables on how exactly a player can make a creature a subject of their investigation, because once they land that, then devising a stratagem becomes a free action instead of costing one action. This also posed problems for GMs to adjudicate these rules. Well, the remaster has changed things, and I would say it is still a challenge to do these things. I think it's more generous for the Investigator player, but I think the language could have been clearer. So I'm going to use my 3 years of law school and legal experience to help you, dear viewer, play and run investigators at your tables. The initial spread of the Investigator is relatively unchanged, the same proficiencies, hit points, and so on, and in this video I'm only covering changes to the Investigator class. We're going to jump straight to the core class feature of the Investigator, Pursue a Lead, and I'm going to apologize in advance that this will be a bit text analyze-y. However, this is not an easy subject, and I think it's what many of you come to the Rules Lawyer for. So Pursue a Lead, I would say, has two parts. First, you find a detail or clue of some kind. Let's say it's a footprint you found, or it's a clue you get from a conversation with an NPC. You then spend a minute examining it or thinking about it, which is the same as before. It took a minute before. And then, based on the result, you may want to open an investigation on something. Now, there are some key changes to Pursue a Lead compared to what existed before. Now it explicitly spells out that the clue in question can be something you get knowledge of from recalling knowledge, sensing motive, gathering information, or a similar action. So if you know that you're going to face a creature in advance, you can recall knowledge about that creature and use that info you obtained to open an investigation into some mystery about that creature. Many investigators will want to hone in on a creature, as we know, because of their ability to more effectively attack them in combat when they are investigating it, as we'll get to later. Another thing that's different here is that when you study this detail or clue, if there's no more information to get, or if what you're examining is inconsequential, the GM will tell you. And you also won't need to wait 10 minutes like you used to before to try to pursue a lead again. That's good. You can make repeat attempts until you find something that leads somewhere, but you're also getting information right away that something is not worth pursuing. The next part is perhaps the biggest change for the Investigator, the most important. It's what you can open an investigation on based on your examination. Before, I'll show the language of the previous Investigator, you defined the subject of your investigation, which was typically a single creature, item, or a small location, such as a room or a corridor. Now what you can open an investigation on can be broader. What you do is you define the question at the heart of the mystery, such as, where has the priceless work of art that was supposed to hang here been taken? Or who or what killed this priest? You would work with your GM to refine the question. And you can also give your investigation a name to better keep track of it, such as the case of the cheated goblin or the skin saw murders. Once you open that investigation, then as before, any perception checks or skill checks related to it will give you a +1 circumstance bonus to the check. Same thing is true for your allies when you clue them in to your investigation. Before, the bonus happened when you try to investigate the lead you're pursuing, that single object or person. Now it's when you attempt to get closer to answering the question at the heart of your investigation. So basically, when you're on the case doing something related to your case, you are getting this bonus. Finding the missing work of art can have many other subjects besides the work of art itself that you would want to find out about, such as finding out common things criminals will do with an extremely valuable piece of art. As before, you're limited to having 2 active investigations at once, and you cannot return to an investigation that you abandoned earlier the same day. Now let's jump to devise a stratagem, the important combat class feature for the investigator. With any creature they encounter, the investigator can spend an action to assess a foe's weaknesses in combat. What this means in game terms is that they get to roll a d20 and see in advance what their d20 roll would be if they choose to strike it. If they don't like the result, they can change their target to something else. But if they strike that initial target, they benefit from their other class feature called Strategic Strike. They get to add their intelligence modifier to their attack roll and do extra precision damage, as long as it's one of these qualifying methods of attack. Now, previously, if that creature was the subject of a lead you're pursuing, then you can use this ability as a free action instead of a single action. A big action economy boon, obviously. But before, your typical investigation was into a single creature. Now, multiple creatures could be involved in answering the question at the heart of your investigation. Because the trigger now, the test is whether that creature could help answer the question at the heart of one of your active investigations. So let's look at one of the examples they give, which is a footprint in the mud. Before, you could free action devise a stratagem only against the actual creature that left that footprint in the mud. But now let's say your investigation is asking the question, what creature left this footprint? Now you can do it against, let's say, people who are trying to protect that creature, who are siding with that creature, or people who witnessed the creature walking through the area. So it's clear that the intent of the designers is to make it easier for players to find creatures that are part of their investigation. So I'm going to point out a couple of things, however. First, I think that answering the question at the heart of one of your investigations implies that it's a single question, when the reality could be more complicated. For example, in the example they give, the case of the cheated goblin, that might involve trying to find out not only who cheated the goblin, but how they cheated the goblin and why they cheated the goblin. A given creature might help answer only one of those questions, but I think a GM should allow the player to devise a stratagem against them as a free action, because they're all kind of related and get to the heart of the matter of this case. Also, it's a free action if the creature could help answer the question. Now, I think a GM should not read that literally. They don't have to be a sentient creature who can literally answer questions. If that were true, then if a bear left that footprint in our example here, that bear would not be able to answer your questions, and you wouldn't be able to free action devise a stratagem against them. That's probably not their intent. No, they probably mean a more general helping answer the question. So the bear that you are tracking, whose footprint you saw, would help answer the question in this general sense, because their footprints would clearly match the footprint you saw if you can kill it. Also, this probably would extend to any farmer or villager who heard the bear walking around. Their information will get you closer to getting the answer. And also anyone who is an expert in identifying footprints also would help you get the answer. And therefore, if you're fighting them for whatever reason, you can free action devise a stratagem against them. By the way, I hoped that they would have made this action have less syllables. It's no less clunky to say now. And finally, remember that you need to be aware that this creature will help you get the answer to your question. If you all find this a little bit torturous, I don't blame you. However, there is a level 2 feat that I'll get to at the end that will help you in this department. First, I was worried about whether this was too fuzzy to adjudicate at a table. However, I think it's generally broad and clear in practice. The greater difficulty involved with playing or running an investigator is defining the scope. When is a new investigation too broad? They say that the question at the heart of your investigation should be wide-ranging and not answerable through quick observation or a single die roll. So it's pretty clear that the question, is this footprint made of mud, would be too narrow and too quickly answerable. More appropriate would be asking who left the footprints. However, one of the examples in the action itself, I would argue, might be too broad, and that is the skin saw murders could be an investigation, they say. That is the name of an entire volume of one of the Paizo adventure paths. It's 1/6 of the entire adventure path that goes from level 1 to level 20. Clearly, there are many murders involved, and opening an investigation into the skin saw murders could pretty much mean that every question you ask is about getting at the heart of finding out who committed the murders. And no doubt there are many creatures who could help answer the questions: who committed the murders, or what was their method of committing the murders, or what was their motive. This tells me that they actually do intend to let you have a very broad investigation. And not every table might be happy with how broad that investigation is. I'd be inclined to go with it because we're talking about a +1 bonus, and also investigators having better action economy in many combats when they're already kind of tricky to play. But I would not allow someone to open an investigation into, say, who is carrying out the rise of the Rune Lords, which is the name of an entire adventure path. So to summarize what we've seen so far, they have broadened what investigations can be about. But there's still an element of a judgment call for the GM or for a table to figure out how broad they want to allow an investigation to be. And I would have appreciated a more explicit and frank discussion of things that a GM probably should say is too broad and too narrow. One last thing to say about Pursue a Lead is that even when you've gotten the answer to the question at the heart of your investigation, you can still benefit from it. So let's say you crack the case of the cheated goblin and you know the mobster responsible. Let's say that mob boss has a multi-room complex with many people who protect them. You would still get a free action against relevant foes, and I would argue that that would include every intelligent foe in their lair, but not the guard dogs outside their front door. All right, that's my long, torturous explanation and attempt to clarify these class features. Now let's briefly talk about the rest. The subclasses saw relatively few changes, but there are a couple that are noteworthy. First, the subclass Alchemical Sciences, the one that lets you make alchemical tools and elixirs by giving you versatile vials that you could spend an action on in combat to create something in your formula book, kind of like the quick alchemy action for alchemists. We now know from my alchemist video that versatile vials now have another use. They can be thrown as bombs. This subclass's special action, Quick Tincture, is the same as before, and I will point out that it's not like Quick Alchemy for the alchemist. It only works for alchemical elixirs and tools, and what you create only lasts until the end of your current turn, as opposed to the start of your next turn. Also, unlike Quick Alchemy, you cannot make acid bombs at will, like the alchemist can. The other subclass I'll comment on is Interrogation. This is the one that lets you open a new investigation while talking to somebody for at least a minute. There was a change to that language, however. They now require that you be using the Make an Impression activity to open an investigation, which I don't see as a necessary thing to do. Make an Impression is that activity to improve the target's attitude towards you, for example, from indifferent to friendly. Well, you're an interrogator. You're not trying to make friends here. I actually don't think this limitation was necessary. Before, it just required having a conversation that lasted a minute or longer. Also, I don't know if I like this language saying you must ask a question related to what you want to investigate. If we remember the Pursue a Lead action, that can be based on some information you glean. Let's say you hear a clue from your conversation with an NPC. You might not want to give away that you're on the trail by asking them a question related to that topic. Also, I see this language here saying that you can ask a question related to the creature you're conversing with. This is a callback to the previous Investigator, where the subject of your lead was a single creature, instead of a question. So I thought that was a bit confusing. I think the bottom line is One of the intentions of this is that if you are talking to somebody for a minute, you can attack them later with advantages. So that's how I would run that part. Okay, the last part's actually fun to talk about. It's the pointed question action that the interrogation investigator gets. It now has an explicit combat use. First of all, it has its previous use, where when you ask a pointed question, they must answer you, and they have a harder time getting a lie past you. But now it says that if you succeed or critically succeed, they are off guard to the strike you make using devise a stratagem against it before the end of your turn. So you can have a turn where you can start analyzing your foe, and then you ask them before you thrust your rapier, who do you work for? And they have to answer you. They cannot avoid answering you. And while they're talking, you stab them in the chest. Anything that lets you talk and roleplay while fighting is a win for me. Okay, now on to feats, which I unfortunately will not deep dive and go through one by one. I've had a very busy month. I'll just talk about a couple that were of interest to me. First, I want to talk about the That's Odd feat because it has been a controversial one. I wanted to see if there were changes to it. This is the feat that when an investigator walks into a location, if there's something the GM knows would lead to more information, if the player investigated it, the GM tells you there's something suspicious about it. We skip obvious clues like a bloodstain in the middle of a room. It has to be something more subtle, like a drawer in the room. And what's funny is that you just tell them it is suspicious, but not why it's suspicious. You just say, that's odd, or that's strange. It's basically a quest arrow over something in the room. Also, you can open an investigation into this detail without 10 minutes having passed since your last pursue a lead. Now, the concerns were twofold about this, and the news is that it hasn't changed. But the concerns were two. One was that it put more work on the GM to come up with things to say when the investigator walks into a room. And as I've studied it more, I actually am not sure it's that big a deal because, one, you only have to point something out if it exists. It doesn't have to exist. And also, you don't have to come up with anything more clever than saying it looks suspicious. You don't have to explain why it looks suspicious. They just have this preternatural sense. Some GMs might actually appreciate someone having this feat because it means that they don't walk past some important clues that they have in their adventure. Sometimes you don't want the players to flail about. Sometimes you want to move things along. The other concern about this feat kind of comes from the opposite direction. There's the concern that it removes a sense of mystery in certain campaigns. I would say two things here, and there's a useful thread that I'll point to that someone made on the Pathfinder subreddit recently. And it helped me say what I'm about to say. One, you can have more than one suspicious thing in a room. Let's say the more important clue can be shielded by something else that's suspicious in the room. So you can point out the suspicious drawer in lieu of the secret door behind the bookshelf. Another thing that protects mystery is that you are simply pointing out that the drawer is suspicious. You're not saying anything more specific. The player might think that there's something inside the drawer that's important. But maybe instead, the importance of the drawer is the fact that it has a lock. Maybe that fact is important to finding out the murderer or how the murderer hid their weapon before they committed their deed. But anyway, this is something you want to talk to your table about if you have an investigator player. One, to find out whether you want it at your table, and two, to be on the same page on how you're going to run it. And I actually think there should be an uncommon tag that isn't here that the designer should have placed there to flag it for GMs and tables. The other feat I'll talk about is Person of Interest. This basically lets you hone in on a creature in combat so that your devise a stratagem only costs a free action against them. It doesn't matter if they're related to one of your investigations. However, it costs an action to activate this, and then it lasts for a minute. You can also use it only once every 10 minutes, so probably once every encounter in most adventures. So that's what I'll say on feats, and on the investigator archetype, there's nothing newsworthy there that I could see. So that concludes my video on the investigator. So my brief final thoughts. In general, the kinds of investigations you can open as an investigator have broadened. There's still some room for judgment for the GM, so still some difficulty there, and I wish Paizo could have been more explicit and clear in giving examples of what investigations to allow and disallow. but in general, players will find their investigations more broadly useful. I'm also looking forward to interrogation investigators using pointed question in combat. So help my channel out by liking and subscribing. Also ring the bell if you want to get notified about my continuing coverage of Player Core 2, and also the upcoming Starfinder playtest. Support my Patreon, and also join my Discord if you haven't yet. We talk Pathfinder 2e and other gaming, and you can play Pathfinder 2e in our drop-in, drop-out organized play system called Endless Tale Tavern. So that's it. I've been Ronald the Rules Lawyer, and I'll see you next time.